Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most common questions I get is how do I make my lineups? And today I'm gonna teach you how to make your own lineups. We have a lot of new content coming out these days, so don't forget to click that subscribe button if you like this content. So we're gonna start with RECON Dart. Now, before you make your RECON Dart lineup, there's a few things you need to consider. First thing is, when do you use it? Where do you use it? And why do you use it? What I mean by this is, for instance, when you're playing attack, you usually have a pretty standard RECON Dart that you shoot just as a round starts. If you're attacking B side on Ascent, you can shoot one at the giraffe's nose, area. Or you can shoot one back here to the backside or something like that. The thing is, if this dart gets destroyed, that's still information. If they shoot it with a classic, it's either an eco round or they have an operator or something and they usually switch to the classic before shooting it. Also, this means that you can hear where they're shooting the dart from. So one thing that is a big difference between good and bad RECON darts is how easy it is to destroy. If I shoot a dart like this,
revealing area,
it flies very slowly and you can hear it very early. So it's gonna be a lot easier for the defending team to shoot it before it gets one tick. If you're playing against decent players, you're never gonna expect to get more than one tick off. Usually it's better for RECON darts to have a 2-bar or a full charge. If you fire, for instance, this one right here,
ahead,
it's a lot harder to shoot before it gets a tick off. And this is also something to do with where you shoot it. So for instance, if I'm defending here, right, and you fire a RECON dart over and behind me, it's really hard for me to turn around and shoot it before it scans me once. But if you shoot a RECON dart that just lands here, then it's very easy to see it, which is why you should try to think about how can you hide the dart from where it comes from. So for instance, one of the cool anti-wallbang arrows you can do, you can shoot it here. So what happens now is that they don't see it coming because it's flying over the roof here and then back. That's just an example. Another thing that's important to know is that when you play, for instance, 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds, the enemy team starts to learn where you shoot your RECON darts. And this is where it's smart to mix things up. For instance, if I shoot this dart here,
revealing area,
it lands here, right? Now you can see very clearly where this scans. So this can teach the enemy team something. Okay, if he shoots the dart there, maybe I can trick him. So where can I hide if I trick him? Okay, so I can hide here, and I can hide behind generator, and I can hide under heaven. This means that when you're mixing up your RECON darts, try to make the alternative lineup reveal the spots where they would hide from your previous lineup. So that's really smart, because then when you're mixing things up, you can see if you've tricked them. So for instance, if I do this one instead now, oh, suddenly it's not hiding here anymore. Suddenly it's not hiding behind generator anymore. So that's just something to have in mind when you're making your RECON darts, that sometimes you can make an alternative that on paper seems worse, but it's based around that your enemies are predicting another arrow, which suddenly makes the worst arrow better. When deciding where to shoot your RECON dart from, you have a lot of options. One thing to consider is if the RECON dart is for you or for your team. So what I mean by this is, if I, for instance, stand here and shoot this RECON dart like this,
scanning ahead,
this is a really good dart, right? But considering it's a flat 2-bar, there's no way I can play off of that information, which means that this is an arrow that supports my team. So for instance, if you have a Phoenix or a Jet here, they can dash in on site and play around the information that you gave them. If you want something to be more self-sufficient, try to do your lineup from a closer spot, and you can give the lineup a higher arch, because then suddenly, see, now I can run here, and suddenly the timing to peak is exactly when the arrow hits here. Another thing to think about is to always check the enemy's economy, because this is something that can matter where you want to arrow. So for instance, if you're playing against an operator, so you see that they have a jet who has a lot of money, you can actually change up your RECON darts around trying to reveal a common sniper position. And this is also something you can do with the recon drone. One last thing that is kind of cool, this is like a nifty little trick you can do, is to try to fake. So you can also use your recon dart to fake that you're going to a different site. So the best way to do this is to have the arrow land as slowly as possible so that you're as far away from the site as possible when the arrow lands. So for instance, let's say you just make an arrow where you just do something like this.
Revealing
Just
area.
shoot a full charge up. And then you start rotating. There we go, that hit on A site. So now they possibly think that we're hitting A site, but you're already on B. However, bear in mind that this also means that you're losing the possible information you could have gained from using the arrow on the site you want to attack. There are also a lot of situations where you use a recon dart without a lineup. You don't have to have a lineup for everything. So one of the important things you can do with a recon dart is to clear a 50-50 angle. So for instance, if I'm here, I don't really need a lineup to do this. By shooting an arrow, for instance, here,
Revealing area.
you can time it so you peek exactly when it scans, so you know what direction to peek. Okay, that was the boring part. Now, let's get into the shock darts. There's a million things to consider when making your own shock darts, but I'll give you a few tips. So the first thing you should do is to decide what scenario you use it in. Is this a post-plant shock dart? Is this an anti-plant shock dart? Or is it just to take out snipers? For instance, you have the typical anti-sniper one. So this one is really good if someone is holding catwalk with an operator, because then they don't really look up. The only problem is that it makes noise. And this is something that is very important, guys. When you do shock dart lineups, bear in mind that they can hear the darts coming. So that's something you can use. You can, for instance, have your teammates nearby either make noise by shooting or something, or you can try to design the lineup so that the shock dart comes as much as a surprise as possible. So one thing that is really important to have an effective shock dart, especially for post-plant scenarios, is to always have a 0 bar for the first one. So you always want to find the fastest shock darts first. But the tricky situation, like say you're here, how can I make my shock dart land here as quickly as possible? So on this one, it's the classic jump click, for instance, here. By already knowing that you can do a jump click here, it means that you can easily chain it to a 1 bar. Because you always either want to do a 1 bar plus a click, or a 2 bar plus a 1 bar. But the problem with a 2 bar plus a 1 bar is that usually it takes longer for the arrows to fly and hit the spike than it takes to defuse the spike. So if you play a map like Breeze, for instance, where there are a lot of high walls, you actually have to preemptively shoot your double shock dart just like you do with Viper mollies and Brimstone mollies, because it takes too long for the projectiles to fly. On a map like Ascent, however, it's a lot easier. So for instance, if it's planted, let's say it's planted there.
Right here.
You can do a 1 bar plus a jump click.
Shock dart.
And that's a lot easier. But when you're defending, it's all about learning timings, because planting the spike is a lot faster than defusing the spike. So if you're gonna make a defender shock dart for common plant spots, it's very smart to make them around some sort of information you can gain. Now, one of my most successful ones on Ascent is actually to listen to the sound of this door. Because when you're playing attack, how many times haven't you ran in here, closed the door, and then went straight for the plant? It's super common. Which means that this lineup here has an extremely high success rate if you just stand here and just wait for the door to close.
Shock dart.
And then you do the lineup. So one little detail about this lineup that is also really smart to make it more effective is that it lands here. Big difference between it landing here and here is that it damages both sides of the box. So if you want to be really pixel perfect when you make your lineups, put really much thought into exactly where it lands, because if it lands here, you can actually stand here and take no damage. So when deciding where you want to use your shock darts from, there are also a lot of things to consider. If I'm making a post plant double shock dart, I should make the lineup from a spot where I'm still close enough to be able to run and peek the diffuser after I've used my lineup. And that is why this spot is pretty good, because if you shoot it here and you run here, you still have plenty of time to play around, jiggle peek, and so on. I've seen some people planting like behind generator, maybe behind green box, and they have specific lineups for this. But the problem with that is that it doesn't make sense to ever play post plant from here if it's not planted in line of sight for you. Another important thing is that you also don't want to bait your team. And this is something that takes a lot of practice to figure out which situation do you go and play for the lineup, and which situation do you just play with your team and play refrags and hold angle. But the key element here is communication. Bear in mind also that every time you make a lineup, you're super exposed. You need to always think about the fact that the spot you're shooting your lineup for should be a safe spot. As soon as you see that everybody that is retaking are either playing rafters or tree, you know that you can safely do your lineup without getting backstabs. Now it comes to making the actual lineup, there are a lot of tricks to make it go faster. Instead of having to ping the map constantly, take the spot you want to hit, drop the spike there.
Spike drop.
Because you can see the spike through the wall. So let's say we're gonna make a double shock dart for this plant, just a random plant that we just chose. We're just gonna choose, for instance, this spot. It's probably a very not ideal spot, but I just wanted to do it from a spot where I don't have a lineup from before, so you can see a realistic approach to how fast it can take to learn a new lineup. So the first thing you wanna do is to check if it's possible to hit it with a click, because that's the most ideal scenario.
Scanning ahead.
So then we try to just shoot a click. Okay, so now I can look at the minimap. Okay, that was a little bit short.
Revealing
So
area.
then I try again, and I'm just slightly altering it, and I just always do this with my recon dart, because then I can see on the map
Revealing area.
where it hits. There we go, that's spot on. Okay, so now that we've found our click, the first thing I do is just pause and look for a very easy way to remember this lineup. So of course we already selected the middle of this one. So now it's all about finding something that is easy to remember for you. So in my case right now, I see that I have the pointy thing here, and I could just drag slightly out of it,
Revealing area.
and I'm hitting it. But this is something you need to find for yourself. You need to figure out which is the best for you. So now that we have our click, we can start aiming upwards and look for a 1 bar to mix it up with.
Scanning ahead.
Just keep looking at the minimap every time until it hits the spike. Oh, now we're close.
Revealing area.
Maybe here. There we go. So now we do the same process. We look around at the HUD, and I notice that this dot here is resting right above my charge bar. So that should be super easy to remember. So now we have a 1 bar with the dot here,
Revealing area.
and a click is right outside this dark thing.
Scanning
And one
ahead.
thing that is very smart to think about here, that the second one should always be vertically right under. So it should be pretty easy to trace this one, right? You shoot the first
Revealing
one here,
area.
and you see I'll just follow that one, and then my second one just naturally feels like it should be here anyway. Now that we have our 2 arrows, we have to learn how to connect them. So this is just muscle memory. You just have to do these ones enough times until it feels smooth. And then eventually, you try it with the lovely shock dart. 1 bar, click,
Shock dart.
and boom. There's your first double shock dart. Okay guys, that was it for this time. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want more content like this, you can subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below on other types of guides you would love to see. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Already outside, guys.
See.
Shock dart.
Gun city, one pushing to city.